Hey everyone, tonight, we're drifting back into a world that looked peaceful from a distance, smelled vaguely of olive oil up close, and where you probably wouldn't last a day. So, get comfortable. Dim whatever light is still trying to act like it has a job. Let your shoulders soften. Let the air settle around you. And let's take a long, slow float back to the places where history unfolded at a pace just calm enough to lull you into sleep, or at least into mild existential confusion. We're starting in ancient Greece. Which sounds glamorous: white marble, philosophers thinking deep thoughts, muses drifting around like idle interns, but honestly, the daily reality of living there was less philosophical retreat and more welcome to a world where everything is dusty, everyone is sunburned, and you're probably about to be judged for wearing the wrong sandals. Still, the Greeks handed us a lot of our ideas about politics, drama, reason, bodily exercise, and arguing loudly in a public square because someone disagreed with your definition of courage. So let's drift into that landscape together, slowly, like a sleepy cloud passing above a city that hasn't invented pillows yet. Imagine waking up in an ancient Greek village. Not Athens at its peak, no, that would be too cinematic. Let's ease into something far more ordinary, because ordinary is always more fun in a slow historical ramble. Picture a small stone house with a roof that looks like it gave up centuries before you arrived. Your bed isn't a bed at all, but a pile of layers, straw, if you're lucky, wool if someone in your family is unusually competent with sheep, and the distant hope of comfort, which, naturally, you're never going to achieve. The air inside smells like last night's smoke mixed with the faint aroma of someone's sandals drying in the corner. You breathe in slowly. And yes, that's definitely goat outside. That goat is your alarm clock. Ancient Greece, where the farm animals run your schedule. You step outside, expecting a refreshing Mediterranean morning. Instead, you're greeted by a sun that has already decided it's your enemy. The sky is bright. The air is thick. And someone, somewhere, is already shouting about politics. That's just how mornings worked. While you're trying to figure out how to blink in the heat, your neighbor, let's call him Macedonios, comes by to complain about the city's newest rule concerning olive taxes. He does this every morning. It's unclear whether the rule actually exists. He just likes having something to complain about, and you, new to this world, have become the preferred audience. Naturally. If you're a man, congratulations, you're going to spend part of your day in the agora, the public square, where everyone stands around pretending to be a part-time philosopher. You might pass someone who looks vaguely like a statue, which means he's been standing still for at least an hour trying to look wise. If you're a woman, your day is more homebound, filled with the kind of tasks that would make modern minimalists faint: grinding grain, weaving, cleaning, keeping the household running, and occasionally wondering how men can spend that much time talking and still accomplish so little. It's truly a marvel. People in ancient Greece loved debates, but these weren't gentle conversations. They were loud, dramatic, and, if we're being honest, not as intellectual as history likes to pretend. Yes, they discussed justice and virtue. But they also argued passionately about whose cousin stole whose chicken, why the pottery was overpriced this season, and whether Dionysios down the street was cursed because his olive tree grew sideways for the third year in a row. The everyday disputes created a constant hum of bickering that probably made the philosophers want to sit under a tree and think about the meaning of silence. Let's drift gently toward the food situation. Contrary to modern restaurant menus, the Greeks weren't eating giant platters of grilled meats on demand. Most meals were humble. Bread, olives, wine that tasted like someone had dared it to go sour, and maybe a bit of cheese if you were lucky. Fancy feasting happened, but not for the average villager. And even when it did happen, the most popular form of dining, symposia, was basically a group of elite men lying around on couches drinking diluted wine, while women weren't allowed to join unless they were entertainers hired for the evening. So, despite how cozy it might sound in theory, the average Greek wasn't living in a non-stop Mediterranean vacation. They were living in a place where drinking too much water could get you sick, where most shoes were optional, and where your greatest luxury was shade. And let's be honest, you wouldn't last long. Not because the world was too hard, but because the schedules were chaotic, hygiene was variable, and the idea of personal space hadn't been invented yet. Imagine trying to relax when someone's cousin barges into your courtyard asking if you know the best way to cure a stomachache using just olive leaves and prayer. It's peaceful in retrospect, far less peaceful in real time. Still, the Greeks enjoyed their recreation. They played games. They exercised. And by exercise, I mean they ran, wrestled, and did all sorts of physically demanding tasks in ways that would make a modern gym look cushy. This was a world where your workout is happening under a scorching sky, and you're expected to pretend you enjoy it because the community thinks it builds civic virtue. Your only consolation is that everyone else is equally sweaty. Truly a bonding experience. But let's drift a little toward the heart of things, the minds that shaped what we think of when we imagine ancient Greece. The philosophers. The thinkers. The people who sat around asking questions that annoyed other people so much that some towns tried to ban them. Take Socrates, for example. A man famous for walking around barefoot, talking to strangers, and asking questions until the other person became visibly distressed. Imagine trying to go to the market for some fish, only to be cornered by a man who wants you to define the true essence of courage before he lets you leave. He wasn't the polished, wise mentor of modern portrayals. He wandered around looking like someone who misplaced his sandals on purpose and had strong opinions about everything. Did he annoy people? Absolutely. Enough that Athens eventually put him on trial for corrupting the youth, which in modern terms means asking too many inconvenient questions while looking like a mystical beach hermit. Another reason you wouldn't last, cleanliness expectations were flexible. Sure, the Greeks bathed. But not daily. And not with soap the way we think of it. Oils, scraping tools, and sometimes just rinsing in water. Imagine trying to sleep comfortably in a world where everyone smells faintly of sweat, olive oil, and whatever they had for lunch. It's the kind of sensory experience that would either calm you to sleep or introduce you to ancient insomnia. And yet, for all the dust and discomfort, the world moved gently. Slowly. Predictably. Sunrise meant work. Midday meant too hot to think. Sunset meant stories and small flickering lamps. People spent evenings talking, laughing, and sharing whatever bread or wine they had. The nights were dark, quiet, and filled with the low hum of animals settling down. There were no glowing screens, no endless notifications. Just shadows stretching across stone and the cool air settling over clay rooftops. If you lived there long enough, you'd adjust. You'd learn to grind grain, to ignore the bickering philosophers, to tolerate the inconsistent food supply, and maybe even to sleep better than you do now. But let's drift a bit toward their politics. Athens loved democracy, but their version wasn't exactly inclusive. Imagine a system where only about 10 to 15% of the population could vote, and everyone insisted it was the pinnacle of freedom. The rest, women, slaves, foreigners, were simply expected to smile politely from the sidelines. The Athenians were proud of their political system, even when it spiraled into chaos. Which it did. Often. Naturally. Because when you gather hundreds of people in one place and let them shout their opinions at each other in the sun, you're going to get some questionable decisions. One such decision was their treatment of generals. Win a battle? Great. Lose a battle? Prepare to be put on trial for incompetence. Even if a storm caused it. Even if it was obviously impossible to succeed. The Athenians had a talent for blaming people with impressive consistency. You could be a hero one month and a villain the next, depending on the mood of the crowd and how much they'd eaten that morning. But despite the chaos, the Greeks gave us theater, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics, and some of the earliest documented drama queens in human history. Their myths alone could fill 100 sleepy evenings. Gods turning into animals to seduce people, heroes completing absurdly dangerous quests because they were too stubborn to say no, and kings making spectacularly bad decisions for reasons that still make historians sigh. And yet, life for most people was calm. Predictable. A slow procession of work, chores, rest, and occasional festivals where everyone put down their responsibilities and tried to remember why they liked each other. These festivals were lively but rhythmic enough to feel soothing in hindsight. Music, dancing, food, simple distractions from the heat, the dust, and the occasional philosophical interrogation from someone who had too much free time. If you're still awake, that's wonderful. If you've drifted off a bit, even better. And if you're somewhere in between is still listening, but barely. That's the sweet spot these nights are made for. Before we drift onward, think about this: would you survive a day in ancient Greece, or would Socrates have questioned you into spiritual defeat by lunchtime? Tell me in the comments, when you're awake enough. Tonight, let's drift onward from the dusty, philosophical noise of Athens and glide quietly toward a place that looked peaceful from a distance, and was absolutely not peaceful once you stepped inside it. Yes, we're sliding into Sparta now. A city where people woke up early, exercised constantly, frowned artistically, and treated childhood like an intense boot camp that absolutely no modern adult, let alone a modern child, would willingly participate in. So, settle in deeper. Adjust your pillow. Let your shoulders melt. And imagine letting your mind stroll into a society that believed softness was a medical condition and comfort was the first step toward moral ruin. It's the perfect backdrop for a sleepy historical ramble, really. Sparta didn't just have a reputation for discipline. It was discipline. The whole city seemed built out of rules, expectations, and the faint echo of someone yelling, "Stand up straighter." This is where we find ourselves drifting now. Imagine being born in Sparta. The moment you arrive in the world isn't met with cooing or soft blankets. You're examined. Not casually, either. Elderly men who look like they were carved from olive wood evaluated you carefully to determine whether you were strong enough to be useful to the state. If you looked even slightly delicate, maybe you had a tiny cough, or your head was a bit too round for their liking, your life expectancy became alarmingly short. The state didn't do fragile. The state barely did moderately sturdy. Now, if you passed the inspection, congratulations. Your life was still going to be challenging, but at least you existed. If you were a boy, a countdown clock now began, slowly ticking toward age 7. Those first 7 years were your warm-up phase, like when someone says, "just a light stretch," and you end up sweating anyway. After that, the agoge would begin, Sparta's infamous education and training system that made adulthood look relaxing in comparison. Let's drift to that moment. 7 years old. Most modern kids would be learning basic arithmetic, trying to share crayons peacefully, and wondering why adults drink so much coffee. Spartan kids? They were leaving home, joining groups, and beginning long days filled with running, wrestling, endurance training, and learning how to survive on minimal food. All because Sparta wanted every citizen to be strong and uncomplaining. Which, naturally, most children were not. Not at first. Imagine waking up in a barrack-style building, surrounded by other boys who all look slightly confused and slightly hungry. You'd have one set of clothes for the year. One cloak. No shoes. Nothing unnecessary. If you were cold, well, that was a personal problem. You were expected to toughen up, which was Sparta's favorite phrase. They said it often enough that modern self-help books would be jealous. Food was intentionally scarce. Not by accident. The city believed hunger built discipline. If you wanted extra food, you had to steal it. If you got caught stealing, you weren't punished for taking something. You were punished for getting caught. Sparta valued cunning. But it valued competence even more. So if you stole some cheese and a guard saw you, you could expect to be whipped, not heavily enough to kill you, but firmly enough to make you rethink your life choices. Of course, the whipping wasn't meant to be cruel. It was supposed to be motivational. Sparta specialized in motivational trauma. You'd train alongside boys your age, doing exercises so intense they would make modern gymgoers cry into their smoothies. And while the training was harsh, it wasn't chaotic. Spartan society loved order. They moved in groups, ate in groups, slept in groups, and endured everything together. This was a world where individuality took a long nap and didn't wake up for centuries. And yet, if we drift a little deeper, Sparta wasn't just cruelty in cold mornings. It also created bonds that you really wouldn't find anywhere else in ancient life. These boys grew up together. They trained together. They learned discipline, obedience, and loyalty until it became instinct. Their lives were intertwined, woven together like a tightly wound rope. And in a strange way, that closeness brought them a kind of comfort, just not the soft kind. More like the "we survived this together, so now we trust each other" completely kind. Now, drifting further, imagine the famous Spartan speaking style. They were known for being laconic, meaning they used very few words. If a typical Athenian gave you a 5-paragraph speech about courage, a Spartan would give you a single line like, "Be brave." And that was the entire conversation. They believed words were like wine, enjoyable, but best used sparingly. Part of their training involved learning to deliver sharp, clever remarks in as few syllables as possible. You, as a modern visitor, would probably try to make small talk. The Spartans would stare at you silently, waiting for you to stop talking. Eventually, you'd take the hint. Or you'd leave the conversation forever convinced you offended them. Which you probably didn't. But you wouldn't know that because they wouldn't tell you. They'd just nod once and move on with their day, which probably included wrestling someone or preparing for battle. And let's drift to the matter of Spartan women. They were unlike any others in ancient Greece. While Athenian women stayed inside most of the time, Spartan women were encouraged to exercise, run, wrestle, and even compete. The idea was that strong women produced strong children. Simple logic, Spartan style. They famously had more freedom than most women in the ancient world. They could own property, speak boldly, and insult men who didn't perform well in battle. Imagine a Spartan mother watching her son come home without a shield. She'd say something like, "Come back with it, or on it." Calmly. As if she were commenting on his hair. No pressure. Just casual parental expectations. You, as a modern visitor, would accidentally offend one of these women within minutes. Not because you tried to, but because you haven't been trained to hold yourself with a posture of perpetual readiness. Spartan women did not tolerate slouching, or hesitation, or complaining. They were the backbone of the society, firm, steady, and absolutely unamused by weakness. Now drift towards Spartan adulthood. If you survived childhood, adolescence, the agoge, the hunger, the constant exercises, and the mandatory silence, you joined the ranks of the Spartiate warriors. But you couldn't just relax at this point. Oh no. You'd live in barracks until age 30. You'd dine with your mess group every night. Meals were simple, often including the infamous black broth, a mixture of boiled pork, blood, vinegar, and salt. Most visitors found it revolting. Spartans said it tasted better after a hard day of training. Which is one of those things people only say when they're trying not to think about what they're eating. You'd continue training, drilling, and maintaining discipline. You'd march regularly. You'd practice fighting techniques. You'd follow orders without question. And even though war wasn't constant, the expectation of readiness always was. Like living permanently on the edge of a very intense meeting that might start at any moment. But let's soften the edges a little. Sparta wasn't constantly harsh. Even here, moments of quiet existed. When the sun dipped behind the mountains, the air cooled, the noise diminished, and the world felt still. Spartan nights were gentle in their own way. A dark sky stretching endlessly overhead. The quiet footsteps of patrols. The whisper of wind through the valley. Nights where the discipline relaxed its grip, just enough for you to breathe. These are the moments when you'd feel the calm side of a society that spent its days in relentless motion. The peaceful hum of a city that did everything with precision and purpose. A city that, for all its toughness, had found its own brand of tranquility in the structure it adored. As we drift through these thoughts, it's clear you wouldn't have survived Spartan childhood. Not even close. The moment someone told you that shoes were optional for life, you probably would have politely excused yourself and then fainted. But the Spartans weren't trying to make visitors comfortable. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They built a society that worked for them. A society so focused, so rigid, and so peculiar that it became legendary. And now, as the ancient world softens into the night around us, let's float toward the next landscape. The next slow stream of history. The next place where you definitely wouldn't survive, but you're welcome to wander through anyway. Before we drift onward, tell me gently in the comments. Would you rather try surviving Athens for a day, or Sparta for an hour? Let's drift onward now, softly, steadily, leaving the stern discipline of Sparta behind like a fading echo in the valley. We're gliding eastward, into a world where the sun glints off polished stone, where courtyards bloom with flowers, where servants move like quiet shadows, and where royalty lived lives so ornate, so cushioned, and so utterly dysfunctional that you wouldn't make it through breakfast without causing a diplomatic crisis. We've entered the ancient Persian court. A place that looked calm, smelled like incense, sounded like whispered protocol, and instead of training children in the art of pain tolerance like the Spartans, the Persians preferred their royals to be extremely comfortable, unusually pampered, and, naturally, dramatically unprepared for reality. Settle back. Let your eyelids relax. This is the part of history where luxury meets chaos, and you get to sit back and float through it like a feather riding the palace breeze. Imagine the Achaemenid Empire at its height: grand halls, columns painted in bright colors, intricate embroidery catching the light, huge gardens watered by elaborate underground canals. It's beautiful. Peaceful. A little too perfect, perhaps. The kind of place where you expect everyone to speak softly, smile politely, and absolutely melt down over the smallest inconvenience. Life at court was all appearances. Everything had to look serene. Even when something was on fire behind the scenes, politically or literally, everyone kept a straight face. That was the Persian style. Graceful on the outside, chaotic beneath the surface, like a swan paddling frantically underwater. Take the Great Royal Road. A massive, efficient highway system long before highways were fashionable. Messages could travel incredibly fast thanks to relay stations and trained riders who probably consumed an unhealthy amount of adrenaline. But inside the palace? Messages traveled slowly, intentionally, politely, and with enough bowing to make your spine fold like origami. No one rushed around the king. If you tripped and fell in the palace, you didn't jump up quickly like a normal human. You rose slowly, gracefully, pretending nothing happened, even if your knee had just introduced itself to a marble column. Now imagine waking up as a Persian royal. You open your eyes to see the morning light filtering through ornate curtains embroidered by artisans who spent months on a single panel of fabric. Servants are already standing nearby, holding trays of water, perfumes, and clothing. Not casually. Perfectly still, like decorative statues that occasionally blink. You would start your day slowly, luxuriously, eating fruits and breads and sweets while a musician plays something calming in the corner. And despite all this pampering, your daily life would still be full of stress, because someone, usually an uncle, a cousin, or a sibling you haven't spoken to in years, was always plotting something. That was the Persian royal lifestyle, cushioned comfort layered over political paranoia. And speaking of paranoia, let's drift gently toward one of the court's favorite architectural choices: extremely long hallways. The Persians adored them. The palaces in Persepolis and Susa had corridors that seemed to go on forever. You could walk down one for so long that you'd start forgetting why you entered it in the first place. These hallways were designed to impress visitors, to create an atmosphere of quiet majesty. But for the royals who lived there? They were just more space for someone to hide behind a column planning to poison your dinner. This wasn't an environment built for relaxation. At least, not mentally. Physically, though, it was the cushiest society the ancient world had seen so far. Soft beds, expensive carpets, rare spices, beautiful jewelry, and comfort at a level that would embarrass a modern luxury resort. If a Persian prince ever had to lift anything heavier than a wine cup, that would be considered a major scandal. And yet, somehow, the royals were always stressed. They were surrounded by gold, but also by court officials who bowed deeply and smiled politely while imagining themselves on the throne. The etiquette was suffocating. You couldn't sneeze too loudly without offending someone 3 ranks above you. Imagine trying to walk through the palace courtyard as a royal. You think you're just stretching your legs. But everyone freezes. Everyone bows. Everyone holds their breath. Because royal presence required absolute stillness. And if you tried to tell them, "Oh, no, please relax, I'm just passing through," it wouldn't help. They would bow harder. And someone would faint from trying to hold the position too long. It was that kind of place. Now let's drift toward the kings themselves. Persian kings were expected to embody perfection. Their beards were immaculate. Their clothing was flawless. Their posture could rival a perfectly balanced column. Of course, this meant they required hours of preparation just to appear in public. Can you imagine the stress of knowing that your entire empire expects you to look like a divine sculpture before breakfast? And naturally, this pressure caused some interesting personalities to develop. Consider Cambyses II. A king whose emotional stability was, let's call it, variable. He allegedly once stabbed a sacred bull in a fit of rage, because the bull looked at him the wrong way. Historians still debate how accurate these stories are, but they do agree on one thing: Cambyses had the energy of someone who did not get enough sleep and definitely needed therapy. His father, Cyrus the Great, was the opposite: calm, steady, diplomatic. A king who somehow managed to conquer massive amounts of territory without making everyone hate him. A rare talent among conquerors. But after Cyrus, things got more complicated. Royal families tend to do that. Generations of wealth, power, and genetic recycling create personalities that make astrologers very busy. Speaking of genetics, Persian royals loved marrying within the family. Sister marriages, cousin marriages, niece marriages. If there was a family tree, they treated it like a tightly knotted vine. Keeping the bloodline pure, they believed, was essential. You might call it a genetic bottleneck. They'd call it everyone knowing their place. But the results were predictable: temperament issues, health problems, dramatic mood swings, and family gatherings that probably needed a referee. Imagine trying to attend a royal banquet. The food would be glorious, the music relaxing, the cushions soft enough to convert even a Spartan. But the tension? Thick. Someone's cousin is glaring across the table. A general is trying not to look offended. A noblewoman is pretending she didn't hear someone whisper something about her jewelry. And the king is smiling in that painfully calm way people smile when they know half the room wants their job. But beneath the politeness, the palace also had a surprisingly peaceful rhythm. Gardens filled with fountains. Peacocks wandering around with the confidence of animals who know they're fashionable. Courtiers walking slowly, as if time itself had softened. At night, lamps glowed in soft amber light. Servants moved quietly. Musicians played gentle melodies. And for a moment, it all felt serene until you remembered that your breakfast taster had a very stressful job. You certainly wouldn't survive a day as a Persian royal. The rules alone would overwhelm you. Speak only when spoken to. Use the correct titles. Never turn your back on the king. Walk at the appropriate speed. Don't show emotion. Don't sneeze without permission. And whatever you do, don't sit in the wrong chair. That alone could start a scandal. Yet for all the palace drama, Persia was astonishingly advanced. Its roads, irrigation systems, architecture, and administration were so efficient that later empires copied them shamelessly. The Persians even invented ice storage, massive yachtals that kept things cool in the desert. They had laws, courts, postal systems, and more organization than any ancient society had the right to possess. But the royals? They were a different story. Living in a world too soft, too quiet, too perfect, they developed habits that ranged from quirky to deeply concerning. Some kings refused to touch the ground with their bare feet. Others traveled with massive entourages carrying delicate items like portable bathtubs. And many had diets curated so carefully that a chef could lose his life if the king found a date slightly too dry. It was a strange mix: luxury and anxiety. Peace and pressure. Beauty held together by absolute rigidity. But that's what makes history so soothing to drift through. Even the most powerful people lived lives that were, deep down, just as confusing, stressful, and oddly dramatic as ours, just with more gold and larger hats. And as we drift deeper into this world, let your mind wander gently along the palace corridors. Feel the hush. The calm. The cool stone beneath your feet. And be grateful you aren't responsible for appeasing 12 nobles before lunch. Before we drift onward, let me ask softly. Would you survive longer in a Persian palace or a Spartan barracks? Tell me in the comments when you're completely awake again. Settle in once again. Let your breathing slow. And drift with me into another long, wandering stretch of world history where almost nothing exciting happens, and that is precisely the point. We've spent some time already exploring the uncomfortable realities of the ancient world, the quiet details, the tedious routines, the moments so ordinary that historians rarely bother to mention them. In this section, we continue our gentle walk through the subtle, uneventful corners of the past, focusing on the daily grind, the overlooked habits, and the faint rhythms of societies that existed long before electricity, long before modern comforts, long before the idea of free time even existed. Tonight, we travel from the worn stone floors of ancient Greece to the slow administrative machinery of Egypt, and eventually to the medieval world, where monotony was practically a lifestyle. All you have to do is listen and drift. The Greek day that refused to end. Let us return once more to ancient Greece, a place admired for philosophy, politics, art, and athleticism. But very seldom do we discuss the sheer, overwhelming boredom that hovered over most people's lives there. The philosophers whose quotes get shared on motivational posters? Well, they had their share of dull days too. Socrates himself spent countless hours slowly wandering the agora, talking to people who probably wished they could just buy their olives in peace. He had no social media, no headphones, no weekend trips, and no iced coffee to sip while strolling. Just the marketplace dust at his feet and a steady stream of passers-by who were quietly trying not to get trapped in one of his famously long conversations. The average Greek citizen, on the other hand, lived in a cycle so repetitive that modern people would likely be asleep by midday. The day started early, far earlier than anyone today would prefer. Before the sun even peeked over the hills, the sounds of animals shifting in their pens and the scraping of wooden doors signaled that rest time was officially over. There were no mattresses. Only a kind of straw pallet. No alarm clocks. Just roosters. Reliable, loud, and extremely enthusiastic. And no matter how much you wanted to sleep in, the entire community could hear if you didn't get moving. Thin walls, remember. So what did a typical Greek morning include? Mostly chores. Endless chores. Fetch water. Tend animals. Sweep floors. Grind grain. Prepare bread. Patch clothing. Repair tools. And perhaps most repetitive of all, carry things back and forth from one place to another. Carrying was practically half of the economy. In fact, if you were magically transported to ancient Greece today, you'd probably be handed a basket of something within the first 10 minutes. Carrying figs to the market. Carrying water home. Carrying firewood from the hills. Carrying pottery to a neighbor. Carrying gossip from house to house, which, occasionally, was the highlight of the day. Now, you might imagine that at least meals would offer some excitement. But Greek food, while fresh, was extremely simple. Breakfast usually consisted of bread dipped in wine or olives, if you were lucky. Lunch? Bread. Dinner? Bread, maybe with vegetables, and on a really special day, some cheese. Protein was a weekend visitor, not a roommate. And yet, despite all of this monotony, life moved slowly enough that people had time to notice small details. The way sunlight hit the columns of a temple. The gentle breeze carrying the smell of the sea. The dusty footprints left by neighbors walking to the market. The quiet hum of insects in the afternoon heat. Thousands of years later, these things still feel strangely familiar. As we wander further through this uneventful Greek afternoon, imagine the temperature rising, the stones glowing warm beneath your feet, and the entire town gradually slipping into stillness. Because if there is one tradition Greeks took extremely seriously, it was the midday rest. Shops closed. Conversations paused. And the entire population simply accepted the overwhelming truth. It was too hot to be alive at that hour. Perhaps this is one part of ancient Greece we would enjoy today. 2. Bureaucracy in ancient Egypt, a sleep aid before its time. Let's drift now to ancient Egypt. A civilization known for pyramids, pharaohs, and grand monuments. But behind these marvels was a world of paperwork that would put even the most dedicated office worker into a deep, restful sleep. The Egyptians were masters of administration. They recorded everything. And I do mean everything: grain, livestock, tithes, births, deaths, number of workers, number of bricks, number of baskets used to carry the bricks, and occasionally, the number of workers who mysteriously disappeared halfway through carrying those baskets. Day after day, scribes dipped their reed pens into black or red ink, and slowly, carefully, documented the minutiae of life on long rolls of papyrus. Their handwriting was so neat, so precise, so consistent, that a modern viewer could mistake it for printed text. Imagine being a scribe waking up in the morning. You stretch. You roll your shoulders. You crack your neck. And you think to yourself, "Ah, another peaceful day of recording exactly how many jars of barley were delivered by the Northeast Farming District." Again. Then you pick up your palette, your little tiles of dried ink, your pen, and you make your way to the same wooden desk, in the same quiet corner of the same stone building, where the temperature is always a little colder than you'd like. The hours pass slowly. Nothing changes. The numbers repeat. The symbols repeat. Your duties never shift by even half an inch. And yet, for the Egyptians, this stability was comforting. Predictability was sacred. Order was everything. That's why, in their worldview, the greatest threat to society wasn't warfare, famine, or floods. It was chaos, disorder, unexpected change. The world made sense only when each day resembled the last. So while modern minds might find this kind of environment dull, uninspiring, even monotonous, to the Egyptians it was the ideal life. The stillness of the Nile, the cycle of planting and harvest, the slow rising and falling of the river, the faint sound of scribes quietly working in rows, scratching tiny marks onto papyrus. A civilization built not by excitement, but by consistency, patience, and an endless love of predictable routines. It's strange how calming that is. Even now, as we drift down the river with them. 3 of the Roman Empire's least interesting jobs. Next, we stroll softly into the Roman world. A place often remembered for emperors, legions, gladiators, politics, drama. But most Romans, like most people throughout history, had extremely ordinary lives. Let's meet a few of them. The public weigher. This was the person whose entire job every single day was to weigh things. Grain. Bags. Fish. More grain. And occasionally, something unexpected, like a goose. Imagine standing behind a giant balance scale for hours, nodding silently as people approached, setting down their goods. Waiting for the weights to settle. Lifting them again. And doing it all over. No entertainment. No stimulation. Just weighing. It was a job ideally suited to someone who wanted to think about nothing for long stretches of time. Perhaps the ancestor of modern meditation. The road sweeper. Roman roads were advanced for their time, straight, durable, well-designed. But they still needed constant sweeping. Dust, debris, horse droppings, all gently but persistently accumulating. Road sweepers started before dawn, brushing stones clean in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Sweep. Step. Sweep. Step. The sound must have been almost hypnotic. The aqueduct attendant. Imagine watching water flow for 8 hours a day. That was the whole job. Just making sure it didn't stop, flood, or leak. A job so monotonous, so quiet, that some Roman writers joked it was the fastest way to fall asleep standing up. And perhaps, as we picture the flowing water, you can almost feel the same stillness, drifting through your own thoughts. 4. Medieval Europe, the era of endless sameness. Now we move, slowly and gently, to the medieval period. A time of wooden houses, smoky hearths, and long, uneventful days. Contrary to dramatic movies and epic novels, Most medieval life was not constant adventure. It was routine. Deeply, overwhelmingly routine. In fact, medieval peasants could predict their lives months in advance. Morning. Wake early. Tend to the fire. Feed animals. Fetch water. Prepare mush. Daytime. Farm work. Garden work. Repair work. More carrying. Always carrying. Evening. Another fire. More mush. Silence. Sleep. No email. No calls. No errands in the modern sense. Just a cycle as predictable as sunrise and sunset. And perhaps most interesting, if one can call it that, was medieval timekeeping. There were no clocks in most villages. Instead, people used church bells, shadows, and gut feeling. Imagine telling your employer today, "I'll be at work when the church bell rings for the second time after sunrise, unless the sky is cloudy, in which case I'll just estimate." But for medieval people, that was completely normal. Their days moved not by minutes or seconds, but by rhythms. Natural, slow, soft rhythms. Time itself was quieter back then. Less precise. Less urgent. A perfect companion for sleep. Via a brief pause in China's Han Dynasty. Let's glide briefly into Han Dynasty China, where one of the most respected professions was also one of the most repetitive. The archivist. This person's role was similar to the Egyptian scribe, but with an even greater emphasis on meticulous record-keeping. The archivist copied texts by hand, stroke by stroke. Sometimes for hours at a time. In a room so quiet that the brush's movement across silk could be heard clearly. Imagine the soft, steady rhythm. Dip, draw, stroke. Dip, draw, stroke. The sound of someone devoting their entire day to forming perfect characters, one after another, until the sun began to sink. A life of endless patience. Endless repetition. Endless stillness. Perfect for the sleepless historian. 6. Viking life, surprisingly mundane. People imagine Vikings constantly raiding, sailing, fighting. But even Vikings had long stretches of boredom. Most of their lives involved carving wood, repairing tools, tending sheep, drying fish, waiting out the long Scandinavian winters. Winters so dark, so cold, so motionless, that entire communities passed the time by quietly weaving textiles. For months. Imagine that. Entire seasons dominated by little more than the sound of wool being pulled, twisted, and looped. A slow, almost meditative soundtrack to life. Even warriors had chores. Sharpening weapons. Checking ropes. Maintaining boats. Sweeping the hall. The sagas rarely mention these details. They preferred the exciting moments. But the real Viking world? It was mostly peace, quiet, and extremely ordinary work. 7. The universal human routine. Across every civilization, every century, and every part of the world, life was quieter than it is today. People walked more, waited more, watched the weather more, accepted boredom more. Their days were marked by tiny details. The way grain felt between fingers. The murmur of daily prayers. The rustle of clothing made by hand. The hum of insects. The creak of wooden wheels. The smell of damp earth after rain. This wasn't the history of wars and kings and conquests. This was the history of everyday life. The slow, uneventful heartbeat of humanity. And in a strange way, it is this quiet history, this uneventful, repetitive, soothing history, that most resembles the world we drift into when we finally fall asleep. A world where time moves softly, where nothing urgent happens, where the greatest excitement might be the delivery of a new basket, or a slightly warmer loaf of bread, or an unexpected patch of shade in the afternoon heat. History, when stripped of noise, is deeply calming. And as you continue to breathe slowly and allow your mind to wander, you might notice the gentle truth connecting all these civilizations. Human life has always been repetitive, predictable, rhythmic. And in those rhythms, there is peace. A peace as old as the Mediterranean sun, as steady as the Nile's flow, as quiet as a medieval dawn, and as universal as sleep itself. Let that thought settle with you. Softly, quietly. As we reach the end of part 4, let's settle back into that soft, drifting rhythm we've been floating on. The past, despite all the dramatic events we like to emphasize in documentaries and school lessons, was mostly made of quiet hours, slow mornings, uneventful afternoons, and evenings that slipped past with barely anything worth writing down. And in this part, we glide even deeper into those quiet pockets of history, moving from one corner of the ancient world to another, never rushing, never pushing, just allowing time itself to stretch, soften, and wander. If you're lying in bed, maybe with the lights already dim, you can imagine us like two travelers in an old library. No hurry. No urgency. Just shelves full of stories that the world forgot because they were too ordinary to be exciting, and too gentle to be dramatic. Tonight, we follow those stories. The silent work of ancient farmers. All great civilizations depended on farmers, yet their lives were so repetitive, so predictable, and so painfully uneventful, that history books often summarize centuries of their existence in a single paragraph. But those quiet lives built everything humanity has ever done. Let's drift onto a small farm in early Mesopotamia. It's dawn. Not the pleasant, rose-tinted dawn we imagine in paintings. No, it's the kind where the sky is still half asleep and the air is cool in that way that hints frost is coming. The farmer rises slowly from a mat that barely counts as bedding. His joints crack in ways that feel ancient even to him, even though he's probably in his late 30s. He steps into a world where the first sound of the day isn't birdsong, but the grunt of an annoyed goat. Animals, after all, have no respect for the concept of waking up gently. The farmer starts his day with the most repetitive movements a human can perform: lifting, bending, scraping, carrying. Over and over. He checks the irrigation channels, tiny trenches carved into the earth to direct water from the river. They need constant maintenance. They fill with mud. They collapse. They attract frogs who, while delightful, are terrible engineers. And so our Mesopotamian farmer spends the better part of an hour reconstructing a small section of canal. It's slow work. Muddy. Uneventful. But entirely necessary. Without water, there is no barley. And without barley, the day becomes much more unpleasant. His wife, meanwhile, is grinding grain on a heavy stone quern. The motion is circular. Slow. Repetitive. Hypnotic. Push forward, pull back. Push forward, pull back. She will do this for so long that her arms will ache the next day. And the day after. And for the rest of her life. The children gather sticks. Also repetitive. Also endless. You can imagine the entire village moving like this. Each person performing a task so ancient, so fundamental, that it goes unnoticed by the world. Yet these are the tasks that kept humanity alive for thousands of years. We talk about kings, empires, pyramids, and palaces. But none of those things matter without people quietly tending crops, day after day, without any drama at all. It's soothing in a way. The idea that entire civilizations were built not on excitement, but on quiet repetition. 2. The slow murmur of ancient markets. Next, let's wander gently into an ancient marketplace. Not the busy, dramatic marketplaces people imagine with shouting and chaos. Those existed, yes, but more often, markets were slow. Sleepy. Almost serene. Picture a market in early Anatolia. The morning sun is warm but not harsh yet. Traders are just beginning to set up their stalls. There are no neon signs. No flashing lights. No music. Just the soft sound of wooden crates being set down, cloth being unfolded, and the faint murmur of voices greeting one another. A potter displays bowls that look almost identical to the bowls he displayed last week. And the week before. And the week before that. Pottery, after all, doesn't reinvent itself very often. A shepherd stands with a cluster of sheep who look deeply unenthused about being awake. A woman selling dyed wool arranges her bundles with a kind of slow, practiced care. A boy tries to fan flies away from a stack of figs, not because it helps, but because his mother told him to. Everything is slow. Everything is ordinary. Everything is profoundly quiet. Markets were social spaces, yes, but not in the energetic way we imagine. They were the ancient equivalent of people sitting around in a waiting room all morning. Talking. Gossiping. Selling a few things. Buying a few things. Mostly passing time. Occasionally someone from another town would show up, and that would count as the most interesting event of the week. Someone might even gasp softly. But for the most part, ancient markets were predictable. Peaceful. Repetitive. The kind of place where you could walk through once. And then walk through again an hour later. And nothing would have changed except for the angle of the sunlight. It's the sort of environment that makes modern life feel overwhelmingly loud by comparison. 3. The rhythm of ancient craftsmen. Let's drift to another corner of the ancient world, into the workshop of a craftsman. Perhaps a woodworker in early India. Perhaps a bronze worker in Greece. Perhaps a textile maker in Persia. The details differ, but the rhythm is always the same. A hammer taps metal. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap, pause. A loom clacks in a slow, predictable beat. Forward, pull, tighten. Forward, pull, tighten. A woodworker shapes a beam with a curved blade, each stroke shaving off a thin, delicate strip. These sounds were the soundtrack of ancient life. Not the clashing of swords. Not the shouts of warriors. Not dramatic speeches or heroic battles. Just work. Quiet, steady, and almost meditative. Most craftsmen spend years, sometimes decades, making the same object with very slight variations. A potter could shape thousands of nearly identical bowls in a lifetime. A textile worker could weave the same pattern for entire seasons. Imagine working in a dim workshop where the only light is a sliver from a small window. And the only sound is your own hands repeating the same pattern again and again. There is something soothing about the predictability of it. Something that modern life often lacks. Even the complaints craftsmen had were endlessly repetitive. The clay is too dry. The metal won't heat the same today. The loom is stuck. The wood warped overnight. My back hurts. My knees hurt. Everything hurts. You can almost hear them sigh. Historians rarely include those sighs in textbooks, but they're there, quietly echoing through time. 4. The great silence of ancient roads. Now let's take a slow walk along an ancient road. Not a Roman highway, those were relatively busy, but a smaller, forgotten path. The kind used by farmers, shepherds, wandering merchants, or the occasional pilgrim. The road stretches across quiet fields. There is no traffic noise. No engines. No music from nearby houses. No footsteps except your own. Most roads in the ancient world were uneventful places. You could travel for hours without seeing another person. Days, even. Imagine walking from one village to another, a distance of perhaps 7 miles, with nothing but the sound of wind moving through tall grass. Your thoughts would drift. Your pace would slow. Your breathing would settle into a natural rhythm. You might see a shepherd tending to a few sheep, sitting under a tree with an expression of deep resignation. You might pass a small shrine by the roadside, just a pile of stones where travelers left offerings. You might notice the shape of distant hills, unmoving, serene, as if the land itself were sleeping. This is how most of humanity traveled for most of history. No rush. No deadlines. Just walking. And thinking. And listening to the gentle, endless quiet. In many ways, these roads are the ancestors of bedtime stories, paths designed by nature to guide the mind into a calm, drifting state. And as we walk along them in our imagination, the world around us seems to slow down too. The most boring banquets in history. Next, let's drift into what everyone assumes was exciting, ancient banquets. People picture feasts, laughter, wine, dancing, drama. But in reality, many historical banquets were painfully dull. Take a banquet in early Babylon. Guests sat in the same rigid positions for hours. Food was served in slow waves: bread, then meat, then fruit, then more bread. Conversation was polite, quiet, predictable. Nobody wanted to offend anyone. Nobody wanted to discuss anything controversial. People mostly complimented the bread. Very good bread. Yes, extremely good bread. I've never had bread quite like this. It is bread. It was thrilling. Meals took forever. The host had to maintain a perfect atmosphere of harmony. Guests attempted to look grateful, even if the only thing they truly felt was hunger and mild discomfort from sitting too long. Sometimes, a single musician played a lyre for hours. 1. Song. Style. Over and over. Pluck, pluck, pause, pluck. The kind of performance that would put a toddler into a deep coma. Banquets were not dramatic scenes of passion and danger. They were quiet endurance tests. You stayed seated. You smiled politely. And you prayed nobody asked you for your opinion on barley cultivation. This, too, is a part of history we never hear about because very long dinner where nothing happened isn't the kind of story historians enjoy telling. But it's exactly the kind of story that helps people fall asleep. 6. When time moved slower. Across the ancient world, life wasn't measured in minutes or deadlines. There was no schedule packed with back-to-back tasks. No sense of urgency pushing people through the day. Time wasn't something people chased. It was something they lived inside. A farmer didn't check a clock to decide when to plant seeds. He watched the sky, the soil, the river's behavior. A merchant didn't announce, "I'll be there at 3:15 p.m. sharp." He simply said, "I'll arrive when the sun is a little lower, but not too low." People didn't divide life into tiny digital pieces. They moved with the rhythm of nature. Sunrise meant work. Midday meant rest. Sunset meant home. Nights were dark, profoundly, almost frighteningly dark. The world grew silent except for crickets, distant dogs, and the soft crackle of fires. If you've ever been in the countryside on a moonless night, you know the feeling. A quiet so complete that it almost has weight. Ancient people lived in that quiet every evening. Imagine sitting outside, wrapped in a blanket, staring at a sky filled with stars, more stars than most people ever see today, your thoughts drifting as slowly as the constellations. That's the pace of the ancient world. That's the rhythm of our ancestors. And it's that rhythm we sink into now. Softly. Quietly. Like slipping into a warm bath of stillness. 7. Drifting toward the end of part 5. As we close this section, think about how many millions of people throughout history lived entire lives made of slow, gentle routines. Unrecorded. Uncelebrated. Mostly unnoticed. Yet these were the people who made the world run. Not the kings. Not the generals. Not the heroes in the stories. But the farmers grinding grain. The craftsmen hammering bronze. The shepherds walking behind woolly animals with half-lidded eyes. Ordinary lives. Full of quiet repetition. And slow, soothing rhythms. Exactly the kind of history that makes eyelids grow heavy. As we drift into part 6 next time, I'd love to know. Which ancient daily routine sounds the most peaceful to you? Tell me in the comments, when you're still awake enough to type. Just let yourself settle. Breathe slowly. And drift. You may continue lying comfortably, letting your mind drift as we resume our soft, meandering wander through humanity's most uneventful corners. History is often presented as battles, heroes, revolutions, and drama. But in truth, most of history was simply people waiting. Waiting for crops to grow. Waiting for the sun to set. Waiting for something, anything, to happen. So let's gently wander into another day in the gently tedious past, where the pace is slow, the stakes are low, and the boredom is soothing. The quiet scribe of Lagash. Let's move somewhere even older and slower now. Far before Greek symposiums and Roman routines, there existed the deeply, profoundly boring job of the Sumerian scribe. Picture him sitting cross-legged on a woven mat in a city-state like Lagash, somewhere around 2400 BCE. The sun hasn't even risen fully, but his day has already begun, because clay tablets wait for no one. In front of him sits a small stack of damp clay rectangles. Not grand political tablets. Not epic tales like Gilgamesh. Not even spiritual hymns. No, these tablets contain the least thrilling words you can imagine. 24 jars of sesame oil, delivered. 2 goats missing from the pen. Adjustment, the goats were found. His entire job is to gently press symbols into clay with a reed stylus. Press. Release. Press. Release. And this continues hour after hour, the clay beginning to dry at the edges. His supervisor occasionally shuffles by with all the excitement of a man checking if leaves have finished falling from a tree. He glances at the tablets, nods slowly, and continues walking, dust swirling around his sandals. The scribe pauses for a drink of water, tastes a bit of dust, shrugs, and continues. Press. Pause. Press. You can almost feel your eyelids growing heavy just imagining it. Why you wouldn't last an hour here? If you or I were placed in that room, surrounded by the gentle smell of damp clay, the dry desert air, and the endless columns of numbers, we would fall asleep in minutes. But the Sumerian scribe? He has decades to go. There is no promotion ladder. No bonuses. No vacations. The reward for accuracy was more accuracy. By lunchtime, his fingers ache. By evening, his back aches. And still the clay must be written on before it dries. This was the original office job. And it was as soothingly monotonous as a quiet rain. The most anticlimactic temple rituals. While scribes scratched away at clay, temple priests nearby had their own routines, surprisingly uneventful ones. Movies often depict ancient temples as dramatic places full of fire and chanting. But the reality? Much quieter. Much simpler. Much more sleepy. Picture a temple attendant in ancient Mesopotamia. His job begins at dawn with the sacred and profoundly mundane task of washing the statues. That's right. Not divine revelations. Not prophetic visions. Just washing statues. He takes a small brush, dips it in water, and slowly scrubs dust from the stone eyebrows of a god who hasn't moved in 700 years. He dries the statue. Polishes it a bit. Adjusts a garland. Then he steps back and admires his work in total silence. The air is warm. The room smells faintly of incense. The only sound is the faint bristle of brushes. It is the kind of quiet that makes your shoulders relax without realizing it. Later in the day, he replaces offerings of bread. Not fresh bread, any bread. It was symbolic, and frankly, even the gods seemed okay with stale offerings. If the temple received visitors, they arrived quietly, made a simple gesture, whispered a hope for better rainfall, and left. No cheering. No shouting. Just human beings asking the universe for a little help, in the softest voices imaginable. Crossing to ancient Egypt, a day of dusting. Let's drift now, like a gentle breeze across centuries, to ancient Egypt, where life also moved at a slow, drowsy pace. Imagine waking up as an Egyptian household servant. Not a dramatic role. Not cinematic. Your primary task is dusting things that will get dusty again tomorrow. Stone shelves. Clay jars. Little wooden statues. Occasional cat figurines. Every morning, you pick up your reed brush and begin sweeping sand off surfaces. The sand returns instantly with a small whisper of the wind. You dust again. The sand returns again. You sigh and make peace with it. Egypt was, after all, 90% sand. By midday, your tasks include refilling water jugs, airing linen, shooing away flies, refilling lamps with oil. None of these require urgency, or thought, or energy. They simply happen. Slowly. Predictably. With the rhythm of a lullaby. Even the nobles had slow days. After all, what can you do when the largest entertainment of the day is watching the river level rise or fall? Life was quiet. And people accepted that. Why you wouldn't last a day as an Egyptian farmer? At sunset, Egyptian farmers returned from the fields. Not triumphant. Not celebrated. Just dusty and tired from a day spent watching crops grow. But crops grow slowly. Very slowly. Most of a farmer's life was standing still, scanning the horizon, squinting at seedlings, and hoping nothing eats them. Sometimes they might chase away a bird. Or check irrigation channels. Or wipe sweat from their forehead. But mostly, waiting. And quiet. If you were placed in that field, with nothing but the whisper of reeds and the slow flowing of the Nile, you'd likely fall asleep right next to the barley. A night in the ancient world. Let's drift into evening now. The most soothing time of ancient life. Across most of human history, nighttime was profoundly still. No engines. No traffic. No buzzing screens. No glowing blue LEDs haunting your peripheral vision. Just darkness and quiet. In a Greek household, the family gathers near a small oil lamp. Its flame flickers softly, casting gentle wobbling shadows on the wall. Someone might hum a tune. Someone else mends a cloak. Someone else dozes off in the corner. The air is warm. Frogs croak faintly outside. Hours pass. And nothing happens. In Egypt, families sit on rooftops to escape the heat. They tell short, calm stories. None involve battles. Most involve simple morals, like be kind. Don't steal grain. Always check for scorpions. Then silence returns. In Mesopotamia, people gather by the courtyard hearth. Maybe they share a small bowl of dates. Maybe they say nothing at all. Ancient nights were made of stillness. The sort that gently settles on your shoulders and tells your mind, it's okay to rest now. The slowest, sleepiest marketplace. Markets today are chaotic. Bargaining, shouting, honking, music. But a typical ancient marketplace? Surprisingly calm. Imagine a dusty town square. A few mats laid out on the ground. Small piles of grain. A stack of fish. Some clay jars. Merchants don't shout. They don't need to. People already know they're there. Someone approaches a basket of figs. They pick one up. Turn it over. Say, then buy it or don't. No one rushes. Everyone moves like honey dripping slowly from a jar. Even animals contribute to the rhythm. A donkey swishing its tail. A goat bleating softly. A dog wandering through and lying down in a patch of shade. Time seems to stretch here. Like a warm afternoon nap. A return to ancient Greece, why their evenings were so quiet. Despite Athens being intellectually alive, most evenings were not. Only a small percentage of people went to the theater or attended philosophical gatherings. Most people simply ate a simple dinner. Talked a little. Checked on animals. Sat by the fire. And then went to sleep. No nightlife. No bright lights. No 24/7 anything. Just darkness, crickets, and quiet. The ancient Greeks believed that too much noise at night offended certain household spirits. So even children learned to keep their voices down. It was a world designed for rest. A world where boredom was not a nuisance, but a companion. A gentle friend who encouraged slow thoughts and early sleep. Why you wouldn't last a day without noise? If you or anyone living today were transported overnight to this world, two things would hit you immediately. 1. The silence. A deep, almost overwhelming silence. No humming refrigerators. No faraway cars. No electric buzz. Just natural quiet. It might actually make your ears ring. 2. The slowness. Tasks take longer. Work moves gently. People pause before doing anything. There is no rush. There are no deadlines. There is only the slow turning of the sun. You might panic at first, trying to fill the time. But eventually, you'd settle. Your breathing would slow. Your muscles would soften. And you might finally understand why ancient people slept so easily. As we drift toward the end of this part, the ancient world was not always dramatic. More often, it was peacefully uneventful. Clay tablets drying in the sun. Statues being dusted. Sand drifting quietly across stone floors. Families humming soft stories under oil lamps. The Nile gently flowing, with no urgency at all. All of it moves at the rhythm of rest. We rush today. We strive. We scroll endlessly. But ancient people, they waited. And in that waiting, there was peace. A peace that now, gently, softly, is settling around you too. Settle in, breathe softly, and allow your mind to drift as we step gently out of the warm ancient Mediterranean and walk quietly into the next era of slow, forgettable, wonderfully uneventful human history. Today, we wander into the sleepy world of medieval monotony, unexpectedly boring castle life, and the slow, grass-growing pace of everyday survival in places where nothing, absolutely nothing, happened quickly. Let the stillness of the past rest on your shoulders like a warm blanket. The least exciting role in a medieval village. Picture a small medieval village. Not the dramatic sort with knights charging through or dragons supposedly lurking in forests. No, this is the kind of village where the most thrilling event of the week is someone dropping a bucket into a well and watching it sink. In this village, we meet the medieval reeve, a local manager of sorts. Not a noble, not a warrior, just someone whose duty it is to count bushels of wheat, check fence conditions, and make sure people don't forget to show up on workdays. If you've ever attended a meeting that could have been an email, you already understand the reeve's life. A typical reeve morning. He rises at dawn, because everyone rises at dawn. There is no alarm clock unless you count a rooster with poor vocal control. He steps out, squints at the fields, nods at nothing in particular, and makes a note in his head. Yes, the field is still there. Then he walks to the grain storage shed. He opens the door. He peers inside. Same sacks. Same smell. Same slow accumulation of dust. He closes the door. Another successful inspection. The medieval grass watcher. While some villagers tend animals, a few unlucky souls are assigned the job of guarding the Lord's sheep or cattle on pasture land. They don't fight wolves. They don't ride horses dramatically. They simply sit. Hours pass. The sun crawls across the sky. They chew on a reed. A sheep wanders 3 steps to the right. They stare at it. In many parts of medieval Europe, shepherding was so repetitive that people created small tunes, melodies meant not to entertain, but simply to stay awake. 4 or 5 repeating notes, drifting softly across empty fields. Imagine yourself sitting there. Knees pulled to your chest, cloak wrapped around your shoulders, wind brushing past your ears. Nothing to do. Nothing to see. Nothing to fix. Just waiting. And thinking. And watching animals that seem to fall asleep standing up. It is one of history's most peaceful occupations. And one modern people would survive for maybe 40 minutes. Life inside a castle, surprisingly boring. Castles in films are bustling, loud, and eventful. But real medieval castles? They were quiet stone cavities where people spent most of their time being cold. A castle without excitement. Inside, drafty hallways echo faintly with the sound of servants carrying buckets. Someone sweeps straw into a corner. Another servant refills a lamp. A maid polishes a suit of armor that hasn't been used in months. It's more decoration than defense. The lord of the manor sits at a wooden table, not strategizing battles, but sorting through mundane reports. 29 eggs collected. 2 broken roof shingles. Missing pig found in the neighbor's yard. The lord nods, uninterested, perhaps mildly annoyed at the pig. Outside in the courtyard, a carpenter repairs a wagon wheel for the 4th time this year. Wood creaks. Hammers tap gently. Nothing interrupts the work except the occasional gust of wind lifting straw into lazy spirals. Even the guards, who you might imagine as vigilant warriors, instead stand on the wall yawning, shifting their weight from one foot to the other, and staring at the same patch of horizon all day long. No invasions. No battles. Not even an argument. A slow life, inside slow walls, in a slow world. Why medieval work was so sleepy? Most labor was manual, repetitive, and rhythmic, perfect for soothing the mind. Grinding grain? It was done by turning a stone in a circle for hours. A deeply hypnotic motion. Fetching water? Walk to the well. Lower the bucket. Lift the bucket. Walk home. Repeat, endlessly. Weaving cloth? Pull thread. Slide shuttle. Beat the loom. Pull thread. Slide shuttle. A rhythm like rainfall. Even blacksmiths seen today as fiery, dramatic workers spent most of their time sharpening dull tools and reheating metal at a gentle, glowing pace. There were bursts of energy. But mostly, there was routine. Life required patience. Steady hands. Simplicity. The town crier's least exciting announcements. Imagine being the medieval town crier, standing in a village square with a bell. Most people expect big news, invasions, royal decrees, dramatic happenings. But the reality? The crier's daily messages were charmingly unimportant, such as, "A goat has been found near the mill. The market will close early today due to mud. The baker requests people stop touching the bread unless they're buying. Someone has lost a wooden spoon." Then he rings his bell once. And walks away. People shrug. A dog trots after him. A child yawns. The world keeps turning, slowly. The medieval monastery, the ultimate sleep zone. Let us step into a new place now, a medieval monastery, where silence was not just common, it was mandatory. If you think your home is quiet at night, imagine living in a stone complex where speaking above a whisper is discouraged. Here, monks follow a schedule known as the hours, not designed to stimulate, but to create rhythm. Prayer. Reading. Copying manuscripts. Tending gardens. Prayer again. Quiet meals. More prayer. No noise. No excitement. Just gentle monotony. Copying manuscripts, a sleep historian's paradise. A monk sits at a desk, quill in hand. He dips it into ink. Strokes a letter onto parchment. Dip. Stroke. Dip. Stroke. He adjusts the page. He squints slightly. He continues. Hours pass with nothing but soft scratches of quill tips and the subtle flutter of turning pages. Sometimes he decorates a letter with a small flourish, a curled leaf, a simple shape, but even the decoration is calm, gentle, restrained. He isn't writing for fame. Or speed. Or drama. He is writing because writing must be done. The stillness of a monastic scriptorium is one of the quietest environments in history, so still that even your own heartbeat would seem loud. Why you wouldn't last in a monastery? Modern life is filled with constant stimulation. messages, vibrations, notifications, sights and sounds. But a monastery has none of that. You would find yourself reaching for a phone that doesn't exist, waiting for noises that never come, searching for entertainment in the pattern of stone walls, listening to the wind because it is genuinely the most exciting sound available. Eventually, the rhythm would soften your mind, quiet your thoughts, and maybe even lull you into the deepest sleep you've had in years. Which is, perhaps, why monasteries survived for centuries. They were peaceful by design. Life unfolded like a slow breeze. The twilight of a medieval day. As evening falls, the medieval world becomes even quieter. In the village, smoke drifts lazily from chimneys. A cow settles for the night, chewing softly. Children yawn and climb onto straw mattresses. Adults finish sharing whatever simple meal they've prepared, usually bread, onions, or a little cheese. Oil lamps flicker, creating dancing shadows on timber beams. In castles, torches glow faintly in long stone hallways, their flames crackling just enough to break the silence. In monasteries, monks gather for final prayers, their voices blending into a soft hum that echoes gently off the walls. Then, one by one, lights dim. Doors close. Animals settle. People lie down and drift into sleep. The medieval world slept deeply and early, because nothing, truly nothing, demanded they stay awake. The darkness wrapped everything in slow, heavy calm. As part 7 comes to a close, imagine all these scenes blending together. Shepherds watching sheep under pale blue skies. Reeves counting grain with half-closed eyes. Monks copying letters in near silence. Servants sweeping the same patch of stone again and again. Castle guards staring at distant trees that never move. Village squares where the biggest news is lost spoon found. This is the heartbeat of the past. Soft, slow, steady, and deeply uneventful. And as you follow its rhythm, you can feel your own thoughts drifting. Loosening. Settling into the gentle quiet that history has carried for thousands of years. Let's drift softly now, away from the quiet medieval world we just explored, and wander into yet another soothing corner of human history, a place where routine was king, where life moved at a pace that would put a modern mind into a gentle coma, and where the greatest challenge wasn't danger, or war, or dramatic events, but simply staying awake. Tonight, we ease ourselves into the Roman Empire's least exciting professions, then float through the slow heartbeats of ancient Asia, and finally drift out toward the edges of the world where Vikings farmed, yawned, and occasionally pretended to be dramatic, but mostly were not. Breathe slowly. Settle in. And let the quiet hum of history carry you. The most forgettable jobs in the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was vast and powerful, but for every general, senator, or glamorous toga-wearing aristocrat, there were thousands of people stuck in deeply unglamorous roles. Roles so dull that modern humans, accustomed to phones, screens, and endless novelty, would last approximately 20 minutes. The Roman Aqua Monitor. Imagine being assigned the task of monitoring water flow in an aqueduct. Your job? Sit beside a stone channel. Watch water pass by. That's it. If the flow slowed down, you took note. If the flow increased, also noted. If the water level stayed exactly the same for 8 straight hours, which it usually did, you continued watching. Aqua monitors were told to remain alert, but realistically, the soothing sound of water and the warm Roman sun created ideal conditions for unintentional naps. Some monitors would pass the time by talking to themselves. Some sang. Some counted birds. One, reportedly, tried to memorize every pebble along the aqueduct's edge. Imagine waking up each day knowing you would spend the next 8 hours watching water move slightly faster than a sleepy turtle. It's the kind of job that makes you wonder if the Romans secretly invented boredom as a form of discipline. The Roman Salt Inspector. Another deeply thrilling profession, inspecting salt. Rome depended on salt for pay, food preservation, and trade. So the salt inspector's job was extremely important. But absolutely not exciting. He would examine salt, poke salt, occasionally taste salt, weigh salt, Stare at salt. This would continue until lunchtime, after which he would return to inspecting salt. If you think scrolling social media is repetitive, imagine evaluating the grain size of identical salt piles for 30 years. Roman librarians, the quietest of the quiet. While ancient libraries sound romantic, the job itself was mind-numbingly still. A Roman librarian copied scrolls, sorted scrolls, dusted scrolls, repaired scrolls. Most scrolls weren't exciting epics. They were treatises on grain distribution, tax records, philosophical musings about whether sandals counted as foot armor. Hours of silence. Dust motes drifting lazily through sunbeams. A scratching reed pen. A low sigh every 30 minutes. The entire environment was so deeply soporific that even the mice living between the scroll racks probably felt sleepy. Ancient China, bureaucracy so slow it could melt your brain. Now let's drift eastward, across quiet plains and soft river mist, and enter the administrative world of ancient China, where paperwork became a near spiritual experience. If you've ever waited in line at a government office, imagine that, but slower. Much slower. The clerk of endless registers. In some periods of Chinese history, government clerks were tasked with recording every household's roof type, number of farm tools, grain yield, number of chickens, number of elderly people, number of people thinking about becoming elderly. These lists were updated constantly, because officials loved data. And clerks loved quietly regretting their career choices. The environment was deeply peaceful, though. Brushes dipped into ink. Hands moved gracefully across bamboo slips. The same character written 50 times in one column. Then rewritten because someone smudged the corner. Imagine spending an entire afternoon writing the character 4 wheat over and over. Even saying that sentence makes your brain slow slightly. Imperial seal stampers. Another beloved bureaucratic role was stamping documents with official seals. A seal stamper could spend an entire day stamping the same phrase onto hundreds of documents. Stamp. Lift. Stamp. Lift. Correct angle. Stamp again. Some were so good at it that they became famous for their wrist flexibility. This is the kind of slow, repetitive job that would turn any modern person into a quietly weeping puddle. Ancient Japan's garden tenders. Now we drift further, gently crossing seas, and land quietly in ancient Japan, where gardens were designed not for excitement, but for serene contemplation. Garden tenders swept small stones. Then rearranged stones. Then combed lines into gravel. Then redrew those same lines because the wind ruined them. Then examined moss. And contemplated moss. And sometimes whispered politely to the moss. The whole process was deeply meditative, but also deeply repetitive. Imagine spending 3 hours aligning small pebbles so they resemble waves. Then doing it again tomorrow. And the next day. And every day after that until you quietly become one with the pebbles. Viking life, unbelievably ordinary. Let's drift north now, far above the warmth of Rome and China, into the land of Vikings. But not the cinematic Vikings who scream dramatically and leap off longboats. No, we are visiting actual, historical Viking households. The ones who spent 98% of life doing chores. Viking farms, less raiding, more napping. A typical Viking day involved chopping wood, milking goats, stirring porridge, repairing thatch roofs, checking fishing lines, complaining about weather, staring out windows, more porridge. The average Viking warrior spent far more time tending sheep than raiding monasteries. A surprising amount of Viking life can be summarized as: is the goat in the house again? And yes, unfortunately, the Viking night watch. Even the village watchman lived a wonderfully undramatic life. He would stand outside in the cold, look at trees, listen to wind, shift feet, look at trees again, Once every few nights, a fox might appear. This was considered a major event. People talked about the fox for weeks. Why you wouldn't last a day in any of these worlds? Modern life is saturated with stimulation. Screens glow. Notifications buzz. Cars rush. People talk constantly. Lights stay on long after sunset. But ancient, medieval, and early cultures existed in a soft, slow rhythm. You would find yourself craving sounds that don't exist, looking for distractions that never arrive, missing the hum of electricity, wondering how people lived with so much quiet, slowly adapting to the softness, and then, strangely, relaxing. Because once the mind settles into a world where nothing urgent happens, calm becomes the natural state. These societies lived inside that calm. They woke to it, worked through it, ate in it, slept in it, repeated it every day. The stillness of the past has a way of easing modern tension. Even imagining these slow, repetitive tasks. The aqueduct watcher, the salt inspector, the garden tender, can make your eyelids grow heavier. And that is something ancient people excelled at without even trying. Creating environments where the pace of life simply softened. As Part 8 comes to a close, let these images settle. Roman officials staring blankly at salt. Chinese clerks rewriting the same character endlessly. Japanese gardeners combing gravel into soothing patterns. Vikings stirring porridge with almost ceremonial boredom. Watchmen standing silently beside dark forests. Garden moss being evaluated like a precious artifact. All of it calm. All of it slow. All of it gently pulling you into a softer state of mind. History is often portrayed as action and chaos. But most of it was peaceful repetition, drifting quietly from day to day. If you lived in these worlds, your biggest challenge wouldn't be survival, but staying awake long enough to finish your chores. Before we drift forward, tell me in the comments. Which job do you think you'd fall asleep at first? The Roman water watcher? The Viking porridge stirrer? Or maybe the Chinese character copying clerk? Let me know. I'm curious which world your sleepy imagination wandered into tonight. Welcome back, dear listener. Settle in, sink deeper into your pillow, let the room grow still around you. Part 9 continues our gentle drift through the unnoticed, unhurried corners of the past. Tonight, we move into a realm of history even quieter than the last, a realm where nothing dramatic ever happens, and that's exactly what makes it perfect for sleep. We're stepping into the long, slow hours of ancient administration. Not the exciting stuff. Not wars, not kings, not philosophers. Just the ordinary, daily business of people who had jobs so monotonous that even their contemporaries forgot to record them. But we remember them now. Quietly. Softly. As you drift. 1. Dawn in a Babylonian scribal office. Imagine yourself in ancient Babylon. Not during a grand festival. Not during the construction of the ziggurat. Just a normal morning. The sky is pale and dusty. The workers outside shuffle like slow-moving shadows. And in a tiny limestone room sits a scribe. Not a famous one. Not an important one. Just a man whose job is to press tiny wedge-shaped marks into damp clay. Hour after hour. The clay tablets sit stacked beside him like little bricks. Some record barley shipments. Some record sheep. Some record the very exciting fact that one farmer owed another farmer 2 jars of oil, to be delivered before the next moon. The scribe stretches his back. He sighs. He dips his finger into a bowl of water to soften the clay again. This is his whole day. And tomorrow will be exactly the same. If you were sitting beside him, you wouldn't last 30 minutes. The quiet repetition. The warm, dusty air. The soft tapping of the reed stylus into the clay. Tap. 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 A rhythm like raindrops on a window. A rhythm that might be lulling you even now. 2. The drifting mind of a medieval bellkeeper. Now, we float forward in time. To a medieval monastery. Inside a stone tower sits a man whose entire job is simple. Ring the bell. On time. Every time. Matins. Lauds. Prime. Terce. Sext. None. Vespers. Compline. 8 bells a day. But in between? Silence. The bellkeeper sits on a wooden stool, staring out a narrow slit window at the fields below. Nothing moves except a distant donkey in the slow drift of clouds. Hours pass like syrup. He counts them not with a clock, but with the shifting light on the stone floor. The angle of the shadows. The sound of monks shuffling somewhere far below. Sometimes he dozes. Sometimes he hums a tune he can't quite remember. Sometimes he just watches dust float in the air. The tower is so quiet that even your breath would echo. You wouldn't last long here either. The stillness would wrap around you like a blanket. A soft, heavy one. Closing your eyes for you. 3. The endless day of a Roman tabularius. A tabularius was a Roman record keeper. Not a glamorous job. He didn't fight in legions. He didn't debate in the Senate. He didn't host luxurious banquets. He sat in a cramped room with stacks of wax tablets. People came to him with disputes about property lines, inheritance documents, and tax receipts. Nothing dramatic. Just an elderly man complaining that his neighbor's olive tree leaned half a finger's width over his plot. Or a merchant insisting he had paid last year's grain tax, only to discover the record was smudged. The tabularius listened. He nodded slowly. He scratched notes into wax with his stylus. He smoothed out mistakes with the flat end. Clients waited in a line that moved at the pace of an injured turtle. Outside, Rome roared with noise. Inside, the office was a bubble of slowness. Every few hours he would light a new oil lamp. The flame trembling with each exhale. People today complain about paperwork. But this was paperwork in its purest, sleepiest form. 4. A day in the life of a village candlemaker. Let's drift somewhere simpler. A tiny medieval village. Thatched roofs. Stone cottages. Chickens wandering freely like they own the place. Inside a dim workshop sits the candlemaker. Her hands move slowly, steadily, rhythmically. Dip the wick. Lift. Let it cool. Dip again. Lift. Let it cool. Hundreds of times. The air smells of warm tallow and herbs she added to improve the scent. Her cat sleeps in a corner, curled into a tight loaf. She hums a soft tune, almost inaudible. The candles grow heavier, thicker, smoother. There is no rush. The world outside could crumble and she would still be dipping, lifting, cooling. You, with your fast, modern mind, might feel impatient at first. But slowly, inevitably, her rhythm becomes your rhythm. Dip. Lift. Cool. Dip. Lift. Cool. And your breathing begins to match. 5. The long road with a Chinese Han Dynasty courier. Imagine being a courier in ancient China. Not one of the elite riders. Just an ordinary man with ordinary sandals. Walking miles on dusty roads delivering messages. Not urgent messages. Not secret ones. Just routine reports from one local official to another. The roads were long and straight. Lines of willow trees drooped over the path. The wind whispered through them like a lullaby. The courier walked for hours. Then rested under a tree. He chewed dried millet. He drank from a little clay flask. Then he walked again. Sometimes he passed farmers planting rice. Sometimes he passed fishermen mending nets. Sometimes he passed no one for miles. Days passed in gentle repetition. His messages were rarely interesting. Mostly lists. Amounts of grain. Tools dispatched. Taxes collected. New oxen purchased. He carried a whole world of monotony in his satchel. You wouldn't last a day. But he did. And the world moved slowly around him. 6. Quiet moments in an Ottoman bath attendant's routine. Not the glamorous steam rooms. Not the massages. But the in-between moments. The attendant sweeps water across the warm marble. He listens to the echo of droplets in the domed chamber. The sunlight enters through the tiny glass holes in the ceiling, casting soft, glowing circles on the floor. Sometimes he wipes the brass bowls until they shine. Sometimes he rearranges towels into a neat stack. Sometimes he sits on a low stool and waits for someone to need him. The hours melt like warm wax. The scent of lavender and soap lingers in the air. Steam curls lazily around the edges of the room. You could fall asleep just sitting there. Maybe you already are. 7. A scribe in ancient Egypt counting grain. Counting grain is not exactly thrilling. But it was important. And incredibly repetitive. Picture a man seated on a woven mat. In front of him are tall baskets filled with barley. Next to him is a wooden tally board. He dips his brush in black ink and marks a line for every measured portion poured. Pour. Mark. Pour. Mark. The grain flows like a slow, steady waterfall. The soft rustle of seeds becomes a kind of music. Dry, gentle, calming. Outside, the Nile glitters in the late afternoon sun. A breeze rustles papyrus reeds. But inside, time stands still. Every mark he makes is quiet. Soft. Measured. Just like your heartbeat as you sink deeper into rest. 8. The stationary life of a gatekeeper in Mobile, India. Picture a large mobile fort. Beautiful stonework. Towering red sandstone walls. And at the gate, a man whose job is simply to sit. All day. Every day. He watches merchants arrive with camels. He watches children chase each other. He watches guards switch shifts. He watches dust swirl in the courtyard. Sometimes he writes down a traveler's name. Sometimes he checks a cart for goods. Mostly, he just waits. People imagine history as constant action. But most lives were lived in stillness. Stillness like the stone arch above him. Stillness like the shadows creeping along the ground. Stillness like the slow closing of eyes at the end of a long day. 9. A quiet market afternoon in early Arabia. Not the busy morning rush. Not the camel caravans arriving. Just the quiet hours after midday. The sun is high. The air is warm. Merchants sit in the shade of their tents. Half dozing. Half watching the world. One man polishes copper bowls. Another ties knots in rope. Another arranges dates in small pyramids. Even though no one will buy them until evening. A breeze flicks the corners of fabric awnings. Flies buzz lazily. Children nap. Even the camels look sleepy. The world is warm, slow, calm. Perfect for drifting off. 10. The sleepy chores of a Viking sheep farmer. Not raiding. Not exploring. Just sheep. A Viking farmer sits on a small stool. Mending woolen clothing. A few sheep baa softly in the distance. The wind moves through birch trees. The fjord water glimmers. He sips warm broth. He scratches his beard. He folds the repaired tunic and starts another. Adventure was rare. Most days looked like this. Quiet, repetitive, peaceful. You probably wouldn't expect the Vikings to be relaxing. But even they had long hours of gentle boredom. Hours that melt into a soft, dreamy haze. 11. Closing thoughts, the comfort of slow histories. As part 9 draws to a close, let the scenes drift together in your mind. The Babylonian scribe tapping clay. The medieval bellkeeper humming alone. The Roman clerk smoothing wax. The candle maker dipping her wicks. The quiet courier on an endless road. The bath attendant wiping marble. The grain counter marking tallies. The gatekeeper watching the world pass. The sleepy Arabian market. The Viking farmer mending wool. All of them living slow lives. Soft lives. Gentle lives. Lives perfect for sleep. And now, let your mind drift with them. Into that same peaceful rhythm. Into the stillness between breaths. And into rest. Welcome back, dear listener. Settle your head into the pillow. Let your breath soften. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on a quiet river. Tonight's chapter continues our journey through the quiet, unhurried side of the past. The side that rarely makes it into textbooks. The side that historians almost forgot to write down. Because nothing dramatic happened there. And yet, those calm, uneventful moments make the perfect lullaby. So here, in part 10, we wander deeper into the world of quiet labor, gentle routines, and soft historical stillness. 1. Waking up in a medieval mill house. Imagine a small wooden mill beside a stream. Not the moment when the wheel turns at full force. Not the busy harvest season. But the earliest hours of dawn. When the world is still wrapped in blue-gray light. And the only sound is the soft trickling of water. Inside the mill house, the miller sits hunched over a bowl of porridge. He stirs it slowly. Methodically. Barely awake. The mill wheel creaks every now and then. A long, low groan. Like a sleepy giant stretching its limbs. Grain sacks lean against the walls. Dust motes drift lazily in the air. A lantern flickers, casting a soft orange glow across the floor. The miller takes a small sip of warm ale. Because water isn't always clean. And because people centuries ago often began their day in this same gentle haze. By the time the sun rises high enough to brighten the stream, you may already feel your own eyelids sinking. The slowness of his morning is yours now. 2. The slow journey of a 14th century cartographer. Picture a cartographer in the late 1300s. Not one of the famous ones who mapped continents or oceans. Just a quiet man bent over his parchment, trying to draw the outlines of a tiny region, no bigger than a few villages. His tools are simple: a quill, a pot of ink, a straightedge made from smooth bone, and an astonishing amount of patience. He dips his quill. He draws a thin line. He pauses to blow gently so the ink doesn't smear. Dip. Draw. Blow. Dip. Draw. Blow. Hours pass in near silence, except for the faint scratching of quill on parchment, and the occasional chirp of birds outside his window. His map may take weeks, maybe months. He doesn't hurry. Hurrying would ruin the line work. The world is vast and complicated. But in his little workshop, everything is slowed to the pace of ink drying. A perfect pace for drifting off. 3. A quiet afternoon with a stonemason in ancient Greece. Not during construction. Not during loud hammering. Just a pause in the day. The stonemason sits in the shade of a fig tree. His tools, hammer, chisel, smoothing stone, rest beside him. He wipes the dust from his hands, leans back, and lets out a long, slow breath. The Acropolis gleams in the distance. But he is not looking at it. He is watching an ant crawl across a pebble. Watching leaves rustle in the warm breeze. Watching goats wander lazily in the distance. People imagine ancient Greece as a place of endless debate and drama. But most people lived quiet, steady lives. The mason closes his eyes for a moment. His mind drifts. Yours can drift with his. Just the breeze, the distant hum of cicadas, and the warm Greek sun resting on your shoulders. 4. The gentle routine of a Persian garden keeper. Let's move east now, to an ancient Persian paradise garden. A paradisa? From which our word paradise eventually comes. The garden keeper steps out with a small copper watering pot. The air is warm, carrying hints of jasmine and apricot. A shallow stream runs through the center of the garden. Its water so clear it looks like liquid glass. His job is simple, unhurried, almost meditative. He trims a rose bush, one leaf at a time. He adjusts a stone that has shifted out of place. He schemes fallen petals off the surface of the stream. He checks whether the pomegranate trees need more water. Birds flutter gently in the branches above. A tortoise moves slowly between patches of shade. Nothing dramatic happens here. Nothing ever has. The keeper's day flows like the water in the channels. Quiet, steady, calming. The perfect rhythm for your mind to follow. 5. A monastic librarian cataloging scrolls. We return again to a monastery. This time, the library. Imagine a lone, cool stone room filled with wooden shelves. Scrolls lay rolled up and tied with linen. Manuscripts sit stacked in careful piles. A librarian, robed in brown wool, walks slowly between tables. He carries a list written in neat Latin. And he checks each manuscript, one by one. He doesn't read them. That isn't his task today. Today he is simply making sure they belong where they should. He picks one up, brushes the dust from its cover, reads the title aloud in a whisper, places it gently in the correct slot. Then another. And another. His steps are quiet. His movements slow. His breath steady. The monastery outside might be bustling. But this room is a sanctuary of stillness, where time moves like drifting smoke. You can almost hear your heartbeat sinking with his soft steps. 6. A day on a slow-moving Nile ferry. Not a grand vessel. Not a merchant ship. Just a simple ferry crossing the Nile. During the late afternoon, the ferryman stands at the rear, guiding the boat with a long pole. The passengers are farmers heading home. Some carry baskets of onions. Some carry nothing at all. The river is calm, smooth like polished obsidian. The sun hangs low, turning everything gold. No one rushes. No one speaks much. The only sounds are water brushing gently against wood, a bird calling from a reed bed, the soft murmur of two women discussing the price of bread. The crossing takes as long as it takes. No one here measures time in minutes. They measure it in the angle of the sun and the rhythm of the current. This quiet moment on the Nile, with the world glowing softly around you, is a cradle for your thoughts to rest in. 7. The slow craft of a medieval loom weaver. Inside a cottage lit by a single window, a weaver sits at a wooden loom. The world outside is bursting with sound. Blacksmiths, chickens, children. But in her little weaving room, everything is hushed. Her shuttle slides through the threads. She pulls the beater forward. A soft thunk. Then she slides the shuttle again. Another thunk. Over and over. Dozens of times an hour. Hundreds of times a day. This rhythm, so steady and predictable, has put more than one child to sleep at her feet. The cloth grows slowly under her hands. A little more blue thread. A little more white thread. The pattern emerges like dawnlight creeping across the floor. You could almost fall asleep just listening to that gentle, consistent sound. Thunk. Shuttle. Thunk. Shuttle. It's a lullaby in mechanical form. 8. The soft, uneventful work of a desert caravan accountant. Caravans crossing deserts often had a person whose job was simply to count things. Count camels. Count bags of incense. Count jars of oil. Count sacks of salt. Nothing glamorous. Nothing risky. Just counting. He sits on a cloth mat in the shade of a large tent. He flips open a wooden tablet covered in wax. He writes neat marks with a stylus. Occasionally a camel grumbles. A breeze stirs the tent flap. Sand trickles softly across the ground. But mostly, it is quiet. Travelers come and go. Someone brings him a new list. He nods politely, marks a few more numbers, and continues his slow, steady tally. The desert stretches endlessly around him. A soft, golden silence. A silence that pulls you gently into its warm, sleepy embrace. 9. A peaceful evening among Japanese rice farmers. Not during planting season. Not during harvest. Just a tranquil summer evening. A group of farmers sits by the field canals, patching bamboo baskets, washing tools, chatting softly. The paddies shimmer like mirrors, reflecting the pink glow of sunset. Frogs croak in the distance. Fireflies begin to flicker. One elderly farmer ties a new handle to a hoe. Another sharpens sickles. Another sits back and watches cranes wading through the shallow water. Their work is simple, slow, unhurried. No one is racing the clock. No one is rushing home. This moment, this golden quietness, is part of their day. The calm settles over them, the way nighttime settles over the fields. Softly, inevitably, and perhaps over you as well. 10. A final drift into the stillness of history. As part 10 comes to a close, let all these scenes fold gently into one another in your mind. The mill wheel groaning at dawn. A cartographer's quill scratching quietly. A mason resting under a fig tree. A Persian garden keeper pruning roses. A monastic librarian whispering titles. A Nile ferry drifting. A loom's gentle rhythm. A caravan accountant's careful tally. Rice farmers bathed in twilight. Each of these lives moved slowly, peacefully, softly. And now, your thoughts can move like that too. Let your breath settle. Let your muscles loosen. Let yourself drift into the gentle pace of these quiet corners of history, where nothing happens quickly, where nothing is rushed, where everything is calm, and where sleep comes naturally. And now, as we reach the end of this long, quiet wander through the softest corners of history, just take a moment to notice how still everything feels. You've traveled through ancient Greece, through the silent corridors of monasteries, through gentle fields and quiet workshops, and through the slow, steady routines of people whose lives moved at the same peaceful pace your thoughts are settling into now. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was loud. Nothing demanded anything from you. It was simply calm. A long exhale across time. And if you're still awake, and truly, many people won't be by now, I want to thank you for being here with me, drifting through these quiet little stories, in the soft, almost forgotten places of the past. You've given your mind a chance to rest, and your body a moment to soften. And maybe you learned a few gentle details along the way. Or maybe they faded like whispers the moment you heard them. Both are perfectly fine. Before we close the lantern and let the night settle completely, I want to leave you with a small thought. A quiet question you can answer if you're still awake. Or dream about if you're not. Which part of history tonight felt the calmest to you? The mason resting beneath the fig tree? The Persian gardener trimming roses? The medieval librarians whispering to themselves in the dim light? Or maybe some small detail I never expected to matter? If you feel like sharing, you can leave your answer in the comments. I read them, quietly, in the same calm late night hours when these stories are made. And if this long, slow journey helped you drift closer to sleep, or even carried you all the way into it, consider giving the video a gentle like, subscribing if you enjoy these peaceful wanderings, and sharing it with someone who might need a soft, steady place to rest their mind too. You don't have to do it now. You can do it later. Or tomorrow. Or whenever your eyes open again. For now, let your breathing stay slow. Let your thoughts stay quiet. And let the night take over from here. Thank you for spending this time with me. Sleep well. And I'll see you in the next long, gentle story. Good night. Crescent Moon.